There's one mistake everyone knows about, but nobody or almost nobody actually is being able to act upon. And it's about building an actual minimal viable product. And it sounds so simple, right? Just build something that is minimal enough that you don't need to spend a fortune of money on it, and at the same time uh, build enough so that people like it and talk about it, right? So it needs to be sellable as well. But the funny thing is, when I talk with founders that want to work with us through our fractional co-founder offering, like where we work with you on your business case and try to make sure you don't waste a lot of money on these things, on product development, for example, we almost always discover that people already have some idea of how the product looks like and what kind of super important core features need to be part of their first product iteration. And the funny thing is, if you actually try to understand your potential customers and get deep down the rabbit hole, you see that a lot of these features or things that founders think they need to implement in the first product iteration actually are not that important or could be implemented later based on real user feedback, right? And this sounds very simple, but it's certainly not easy. And today I want to show you an example from I think 2014, 15. This ZANO, however you pronounce it, micro drone, which was basically supposed to be a mini drone that flies, let's say, 5 meters up or whatever, and takes a nice little selfie of you, right? And I've also brought their Kickstarter campaign here, so they raised, I think, 2.3 million pounds, which is quite some money, and they completely failed, right? And they made exactly this mistake by building lots of stuff, lots of features, completely overpromising what basically they're aiming to deliver, and in the end basically completely disappointing by, funnily enough, the drone not being able to properly fly, and at the same time the video photo quality itself was subpar as well. So basically what you could consider as the core feature, well, please make cool, awesome, high quality pictures and videos of myself, and at the same time actually be a drone will not be sufficiently covered, right? And I get that, of course. It's hardware is super difficult, right? There are lots of challenges attached to it, but that's the thing, right? When you're building a new product, you need to be aware that there are a lot of unknowns, and instead of having a huge product roadmap, what you think is absolutely necessary, and implementing all that stuff, but not focusing on that single one thing. Like, what is the single one thing you need to build in order to build a successful first product iteration? And again, that does not mean you don't build all the other fancy stuff, right? Like certain modi, like, okay, it flies this way, it has that recovery mode, blah blah blah, right? There are lots of things, of course, people want and might want, but that doesn't mean that your first initial product iteration on the market needs to have all these things. Let consumers tell you certain things, right? Of course, you need to have a certain standard, especially if you sell to B2C, right, to consumers, which in general have really high expectations while not having the largest budgets. But still, you need to carefully find the line of what the actual MVP is, right? Find that single one thing. And if you discover yourself explaining your software product in more than one or two sentences, like that infamous elevator pitch, or people being confused of what you built, then usually that's a strong indicator that you're building something that's much more complex than it needs to be, right? Because usually when people understand your problem, the next question, if they're somewhat interested, should be how much? How expensive is it? Not like how does that work? Or does that mean like? Or whatever, right? Of course, assuming that you talk to a qualified prospect, someone who actually would know what you want, like actually needs what you want, right? Assuming you did proper market validation as well. But talking about the ZANO drone again. So basically, they made large, ambitious promises like it should do all these advanced things, and also, of course, do the basics like high quality video capturing and all these kind of things. But in the end, they didn't fully develop all that stuff, right? Just imagine building a drone that isn't able to fly in the way that you would expect it to fly, and at the same time the video quality is subpar. Like, why would I buy, like, spend some money, like a lot of money on basically let's say a fancy selfie stick when it then doesn't make great pictures or videos, right? So that's just already sounds super silly, but they made that mistake. And before you think, okay, that doesn't apply to me, I promise you, almost all founders make the same mistake. I did it myself, right? And just a few weeks ago, just also our clients as well, just a few weeks ago, I talked with two founders who are building for 6 months a financial app, and they were super emotional about what they want to build and didn't understand that they need to be in touch more with the market, with the user that they are trying to build for, instead of thinking, okay, we are the first app that does Y, right? And that's because they will want us, right? Of course, product-led growth is a thing, right? But that assumes you did proper user feedback testing and all these kind of things, so that you know what you're building actually hits market demand, right? And aside from that, of course, go-to-market strategies and these kind of things also need to be in place. But going back to the ZANO drone, so focus on one single thing, one single happy path. Like, what is the one thing your product needs to do in order to be sellable, in order to be attractive to potential buyers? That's the first thing, and the ZANO drone completely failed at that, right? They've built all this fancy stuff instead of focusing on one core thing, making awesome videos through like flexible to height and perspective. That's basically the minimal happy path, which is already complex enough to develop, right? Without all these complex features, right? So that's the first part, right? And when you build a product, you have to assume that there are a lot of technical challenges that you are not aware of yourself, right? Even though you think, okay, yeah, we are able to build that with $2 million or even just half of that, I promise you there are much more obstacles along the way, be it technical nature, product like scope creep, because new feature requests trickle in from management, or you get own new ideas, or someone talks with you and you think, okay, now we also need to do that, and all that kind of stuff, right? So there will be other things that you think you need to do or that you weren't aware of that you need to do. Right, so your initial scope of what you need to build for your MVP will enlarge. That's almost a certain consequence, always, right? No matter how disciplined you are, there are things you don't know because you don't know what you don't know, right? And that's definitely one big thing. There are a lot of technical challenges ahead that you're not fully aware of, no matter how much of a technical genius you are, right? Because if you are, you know that. That's definitely the next thing. And they didn't do that, right? They know, also they did all that fancy stuff and then were completely overwhelmed with their basically core product and didn't deliver. So that's part of the first issue. Because you think you need to build a lot of stuff, you're not focusing on your core happy path, the core thing that you need to deliver. You're completely overwhelmed by all these side quests, basically, right? And yeah, in their case, but that's just to mention to be complete here, they also had management issues because I think one of the founders or key person, something like that, also had health issues, and that was within the time where they really needed that person, right? So that of course was also a major issue, but in the startup world, that's almost like that key person risk. It's almost always a thing you can't really avoid, or maybe you shouldn't even avoid because it just drains more resources than you have, right? But just to mention, to be complete here. And what do I want to say with that? If you think, because everyone knows what an MVP is, but not everyone actually understands what that really means. If you think you have your MVP figured out, I really urge you to be as objective and critical as possible and ask yourself these three questions. What is one thing, also the really one thing our product is doing, right? And what is that one thing, basically, what differentiates us? Like, why are we building this? It really forces you to go down the USP route, like, what is our unique selling proposition? And then making that single piece, that single feature, that product, let's say, that MVP, so good that it just feels natural for people. And that's the first question. What's a single one feature that your product should focus on, right? And if you have two, no, focus on one. I know it's difficult, but it's not two, it's not three, it's not four, it's one single feature. Really important message here. Second question, in order for people to switch their current product or service, your competing product usually, and of course that's just a ballpark, needs to be 10 times as good as the one from the competition. Right? And if you're not 10 times as good as the competition, well, like, why should the people go through the inconvenience of switching to you, right? So also here, the easier, of course, you make it to switch to you, the better, because that reduces the inconvenience. But at the same time, your product needs to be much better, right? So how do you do that with the limited resources that you have? If you plan to disrupt an industry or disrupt a more mature product, like, what are the things that people are complaining about? What are the things that you can make multiple times better than them in order for people, like at least these people, to switch to yours, right? So that's the thing. And the third one, because you're a startup, also ask yourself, like, how can we, like, it's not a question necessarily from the get-go, but it's also really interesting. How can we make the product in a way that it's 10 times cheaper, more affordable in terms of unit economics? As said, it's not super important from the start because you basically have to start somewhere. But also that lens, how can I make it cheaper, like on a multitude, like 10 times, let's keep it that way, I'm not able to pronounce it anymore. Like, how can you be 10 times as cheap as your competition with the product, focusing on these core pain points by basically just having that one core feature? I know that's a lot of things, and of course, that's an oversimplification as well, right? So it depends on business case per business case, on the industry you're focusing on, who your potential ICP is, like, who are you actually selling to, because it's different if you sell to enterprise, it's different if you sell to consumers, and so on and so forth, right? And of course, it's very different if you sell to public institutions or governments, right? But in the end, it's the same story. If you think you need develop whatever, right? Even for your MVP, you most likely are wrong. There are very creative ways to evaluate proper demand, to potentially even sell your product before it's fully developed or even there, or sell a subversion of it or whatever. There are a lot of creative ways of de-risking your business, right? And the markets are not in 2021 anymore, where you can easily raise tons of money with just a PowerPoint, right? So I hope this video helped you a little bit. Drop your questions below, but in the end, it's try not to be another ZANO.